Hi, I'm Tim Berglund with Confluent. I'm standing here in front of this stream on a rather chilly day in the suburbs of Denver, Colorado, to tell you all about Apache Kafka 2.7. Now, as always, the things to talk about in a new release are the KIPs, or the Kafka Improvement Proposals. A Kafka Improvement Proposal starts as a wiki page that's kind of outlining the motivation for the change and the proposed approach to it, and then a bunch of work follows. That KIP gets merged into a release, and off we go. So today, in 2.7, I've got two categories of KIPs to talk to you about: Kafka Core and Kafka Streams. Let's get started on the Kafka Core KIPs. KIP 497 is entitled Add Interbroker API to Alter ISR. Now, let me explain some background. Every partition leader maintains the ISR list, or the list of in-sync replicas. So that partition has got replicas, probably placed on other brokers. Some of those are at any given time going to be in sync, and some of them are not in sync. You can look up the definition of that, but just suffice it to say, the ISR list is the list of replicas that are up to date and trustworthy on that account. Now, the controller can change the ISR list, which it has to do when it's managing failover, and of course a partition leader can modify the ISR list if it determines that one of its followers has fallen out of sync. Traditionally, both of those actors there, the controller and the partition leader, would both talk to Zookeeper directly. There's a Z node and potentially another Z node that they will tickle directly inside of Zookeeper to make that happen, and it can take a while then for the controller to have a consistent view of that state when the partition leader changes it. So you have these two actors changing a thing, and now you have to get consensus about what the current state of that thing is. Kind of a classical distributed systems problem, which we'd rather not have. So now with this KIP, what happens is there's a new admin API that partition leaders use to talk directly to the controller. And so they don't talk to Zookeeper directly anymore. Two good things about this. Number one is you have basically instant consistency about the new ISR list rather than taking up to a minute like it used to. And brokers aren't talking to Zookeeper. So this is one of the many things, as we talk about KIP 500, as I've been talking about KIP 500 for the last year, every time there's a KIP that's related to 500, it usually is an apron string being cut. Some little connection from something in the system to Zookeeper that's not a connection anymore, and that's the case here. So once all these are done, then Zookeeper will just, have removed all that connective tissue. It'll just kind of come out, and we'll have a Zookeeper-less Kafka. So this is related to that, but also makes its own improvements in ISR list modifications and the latency associated with them. KIP 599 has to do with throttling the rate of creating topics, deleting topics, and creating partitions. So when we're creating a new topic, which really means we're creating some number of new partitions, if that's happening at a high rate, that can overwhelm the controller if you have a sudden burst of topic creation, which could happen for any number of reasons. And so this really just has to do with throttling the rate at which those can occur at the controller. We have a new quota and a new associated quota manager. That new quota is called controller mutation rate. So that's the number of partition mutations during a configurable period. What's that period? Well, that's a broker config controller quota window size in seconds. And so we have a certain number of those things that can happen within that window. We also have a new error if you exceed that quota. That's throttling quota exceeded, and of course the attendant metrics for us to be able to take a look at this stuff. This is just a way of loving the controller a little bit in situations where there might be client applications that are doing things that would overwhelm it. We have a nice responsible way of throttling it so that it doesn't fall over. KIP 612 gives us the ability to limit connection create rate on brokers. Now, it has long been possible to throttle the rate of connection attempts from unauthenticated clients, because that's just like an obvious source of malfeasance, right? Somebody can DOS you if they have access to port 9092 and some bootstrap servers, then they can just kind of hammer away and kill things. So that's always been possible, or long been possible, to throttle that. But what about authenticated clients? Now, we trust them a little more, but like Baron Harkonnen broke the imperial conditioning of Dr. Yui, sometimes they go south, or sometimes they can get confused and just accidentally do the wrong thing. So this KIP has to do with throttling those authenticated clients and potential connection storms from them. So we've got a few new config parameters. That's max connection creation rate. That's a rate per second, or the maximum connection creation attempts per second that we'll tolerate. And in the Kafka configs command line tool, we've got some new switches you see there: entity type and entity name. If we want to specify that rate with respect to a particular source IP, we can now do that with the Kafka configs command line tool. KIP 651 gives us the ability to use the PEM format for certificates and for private keys. Now, historically, Kafka has given us PKCS12 and JKS, that's the Java key store, file formats as ways of storing certificates and key pairs. And I know you don't want to rush into these things, but we've added PEM support. And the super cool thing about this now is that just the PEM file basically can be the value of a config parameter. And so with dynamic broker reconfiguration, now we have the ability to change keys and change certs dynamically through the config file and through using the PEM file format, which mileage may vary, and everyone is entitled to her or his own opinion, but personally I would much rather deal with PEM files than JKS files or PKCS12 files and all the command line tools that you have to use to manipulate them. So this is a huge improvement in usability, and as you can see, we've got the SSL key store certificate chain and SSL key store key config parameters now that work along with this. KIP 545 support automated consumer offset sync across clusters in MirrorMaker 2.0. Now, MirrorMaker 2.0 was merged in KIP 382 that was Apache Kafka 2.4, and what it does is it keeps topics in sync between Kafka clusters. It's the multi-data center, multi-cloud, or hybrid cloud solution in AK, and consumer offsets between those topics don't automatically stay in sync between the two clusters. And that makes sense if you think about it. MirrorMaker acts as a Kafka Connect connector, and there's no reason those offsets would stay in sync by themselves. And now there is an automated way to get that done. Prior to 2.7, as an operator, you had to run external tooling to translate those offsets, but now with the configuration setting, MirrorMaker 2.0 can automatically translate and sync those offsets, so consumers can kind of bounce back and forth or failover between clusters a little bit more easily. Not enabled by default, but that config that you see there, emit checkpoints enabled, and primary backup sync group offsets enabled, set those to true, and away you go. So we've got a couple of Kafka Streams KIPs. Let's take a look at those. We've got KIP 450. Now, this is a KIP led by a friend of mine, Leah Thomas, just over the last few months, that has to do with sliding windows. Now, historically in Kafka Streams, you've got tumbling, hopping, and session windows, and I will not give you a detailed description of all of those right now, but let's just talk about hopping real quick. So a hopping window is where the window has a certain width, and then after some discrete period of time, it hops. Like say it's a 10-second window, and every second it hops 1 second forward. And that can be very useful for certain kinds of aggregations, but some people were finding that they really wanted that hopping time to approach 0, or the smallest possible quantum of time that streams would deal with. So you'd find people making like 1 second or 1 millisecond hopping windows, which could work sometimes, but all of those windows that got created in that very, very small hop, those used memory and resources and had to be kept around for late arriving data and all the sorts of things that attend extant windows. So that was bad. Now we have sliding windows, which allows us to define a window width and what amounts to a continuous sliding over time, such that each event that shows up in a window only shows up in one of them as it slides. And I say continuous, it looks continuous, right? But of course there are discrete time steps, just the smallest possible time step that it takes. Brief summary there of sliding windows. Huge improvement for the aggregations where people were doing the hopping window hack, and hopefully this will change your life if you were one of those people. KIP 613 gives us some new metrics for computing end-to-end latency in a Streams application. This is often what you really want to know, right? There are lots of latencies that you can study, and when you're debugging and optimizing things, then there's more than one latency that you're going to have to look at to understand where your hotspots are and what's really going on and what can be improved. But when you just want to look at latency, what's the thing you want? You want end-to-end. Where does the event start and where does it stop in terms of my stream processing topology? And this KIP gives us 3 new metrics associated with that: min, max, and average. So this should be something that makes it hugely easier for you to look at end-to-end latency in a stream processing application. It's now just an automatic thing that's exposed for you, and you don't have to go to any weird lengths of trying to compute that or back it out of any other measurements by yourself. So that's it. That's Apache Kafka 2.7, a fairly simple release. I do strongly encourage you to download it and try it out. Remember, there's always the release blog post that goes into more detail. It's very simple to Google any one of these KIPs. You get the wiki page. They are super friendly. They are worth digging into in detail. But what is most of all worth it is that you download 2.7 and try it out and get building something. And as always, let us know what that is. We always want to hear what you're working on. Thanks.